lovelies, welcome if you're new, welcome back if you're not new. Today on Simply Loren, we are going to be going over the chainsaw and everything you need to know about it as a firefighter. This video is not intended to be all-encompassing, but it is intended to help give you a better general idea of how a chainsaw operates, the parts of the chainsaw, and a couple of bonus troubleshooting tips. I'm going to preface this by saying I am not a pro, I'm not a small engines expert, I'm just a firefighter. I'm actually on probation at this new department, and I've been a firefighter for almost 2 years, so I don't know that much, but I'm going to share with you what I do know. I'm sure you're already aware there are different types of chainsaws. Battery operated 50-to-1 with different manufacturers, and they can vary in size, weight, and their intended purpose. Today we're going to be focusing on this one that I pulled off of our brush truck, and we're going to start by labeling its parts. So this piece right here is your chain brake, your handle, your decompression button, your pull string, your choke system, your safety, and your trigger. Before we go any further, let's check our chain tightness, our bar oil, and our 50-to-1. To check your 50-to-1, you just open the cap, make sure that you have some in there. Same thing with your bar oil and our actual chain. So there's a couple things you want to check with this chain. The first thing you want to check is the direction of the blades. When the chainsaw operates, it'll move in this direction. So you want to make sure that the way that it's cutting is matching up with the way that it's moving. Some people like to look at the shark fins to tell which direction the shark is going. I actually use this piece where the sharp edge is cutting and the dull edge is behind. Since this piece does a lot of the cutting, you also want to check to make sure there's not any crazy amounts of chipping happening. For example, we have a pretty straight edge here, and then if you come look over here, you can see a little bit of wear and tear on the actual blade. If you see a significant amount of that, I definitely would report it and see if you need to change the chain. Another thing I wanted to point out is how to actually check this. A lot of people will say make sure that it's tight enough, but they don't really describe how tight it should be. A good rule of thumb from what I've been told is to make sure that you can see at least one of these circles when you pull up. Since I already have a video about how to properly start a chainsaw, which you can click here or find in the description box below, I want to keep this video a little bit more focused on chainsaw operations and the maintenance of the chainsaw itself. So let's talk about actual chainsaw operation. What's happening inside the machine? Starting with chainsaws using 50-to-1 instead of gas. If you're having trouble remembering that chainsaws use 50-to-1, just remember that any small engine that rotates while you use it can be used upside down or in a different position is probably going to take 50-to-1. Let's talk about starting a chainsaw with a cold start. Basically, a cold start is when you haven't touched the chainsaw in a little bit, so you're going to start it cold. Everything has not had a chance to warm up, and everything is probably sitting down at the bottom due to gravity. So since everything in the chainsaw has sunk down to the bottom of the chainsaw, we need to find a way to essentially prime the system. Basically, a chainsaw needs the right mixture of 50-to-1 and air to actually ignite the spark that goes start off the mechanical piece that actually starts the saw running. That's where the choke system comes into play. You've got full choke, half choke, and run. When we're doing a cold start, we want to make sure that the system is in full choke because, again, we have an abundance of air but not enough fuel mixture in order to start the saw at the appropriate ratio effectively so that the spark can ignite. So because there's an abundance of air, we essentially want to choke the system to hold some of that air back and allow more fuel mixture to go forward in order to make the right ratio. When the right ratio is mixed in the system, it allows for appropriate lubrication and the appropriate amount of spark to actually start. So all of the electricity, if you will, being made goes into the spark plug. The spark plug will essentially put pressure into this tiny little compartment, and that will force trying to make this simple, that will force a piece of machine to start off another machine, which will rotate and actually start the spinning of the saw. So all of these things have to be in order for the flow to work properly. It's kind of like flowing water at a fire. If you have too much water, it's not good. If you have too much pressure, it's not good. You have to have the right amount of balance. When we're pulling on the handle of the saw, we're essentially allowing the 50-to-1 to flow into the saw kind of towards the spark plug. So what'll happen is if we pull too many times, too much of that fluid is going to end up at the spark plug and it ends up flooding the saw, which is why we say that the chainsaw flooded. If you open up the cap on your chainsaw, you can actually see where the spark plug is and you can see the fluid buildup. That's why an easy fix to a flooded chainsaw is taking off the cap and cleaning out the spark plug. And depending on how flooded the system actually got, you may need to actually let it sit for a little while. I think of it like I'm going camping and I have two rocks that I'm banging together trying to create a spark that needs the right amount of fuel mixture in order to actually ignite and then start the chainsaw. Once you have the right mixture, then your spark will put pressure into this chamber and it will push your machine to actually start going and it'll start to go. I mentioned earlier, this is kind of like jump starting a heart or a car. You're kick starting this machine, which means when the machine starts, it wants to run. And that leads me to a controversial opinion of why I don't start my saw with my chain brake on. The average individual can probably get away with starting the saw with their chain brake on and not have too much wear and tear. But as a firefighter, we start our chainsaws every single day, and over time, this can lead to damage to the saw. As like I said, it's getting a kickstart of energy essentially that wants to move this machine, and now you're stopping that from happening with the chain brake. So you're creating this happening. Whenever pieces of metal slam together too much, then it can create damage. This leads me to another little point about that container that the spark is going into. This is a pressurized container. The pressure is forcing the piece of metal to start the rest of the machine. So what happens is when we turn off the chainsaw, the machine stops altogether in whatever position that piece is in. So if the chainsaw gets cut off and that chamber is pressurized, then it's going to stay pressurized. So the next time that you go to pull on the actual handle piece in order to start your chainsaw, you're gonna have issues pulling it because there's already so much pressure built up in that little chamber that you're trying to add more pressure to. Basically, the saw is holding a bunch of pressure that needs to decompress, which is why we have the decompression button. Bringing me to another point, have you ever pulled the handle right off of the string of the saw? If so, it could be because you forgot to push the decompression button. Lastly, I want to talk about idling. So like I said a few times now, the saw wants to go. It wants to start. It's going hard on high throttle. But most of us know small engines really shouldn't be operating at high throttle when you first start them. We want to allow the machine to warm up. So the saw starts, it wants to be in high throttle, and that's why we pull the trigger to push it back to low throttle, so that way the machine can actually start to warm up a little bit before we run it to high throttle. The chainsaw only really needs a couple of seconds to do this, but oftentimes people will leave them idling on the grass somewhere and come back to it after they've done the rest of their checks. The issue with this is, like I said, it starts in high throttle because the chainsaw was meant to run in high throttle. Every time we cut something, think about it, we're cutting it all the way in high throttle, right? So when we leave it sitting in low throttle on the grass somewhere for an extended amount of time, essentially it is just building up excess fluid because it's not appropriately burning off the amount of fluid, so we may see smoke or come back to find that the chainsaw is actually flooded again later. Sorry that this video got a little bit complicated, but I wanted to really get you to have a basic understanding of how the chainsaw operates, the parts of the chainsaw, and how to troubleshoot whenever things go wrong. Because if we know why things are happening, then it's easier for us to properly fix them whenever we need to. Hope this helps you. If you're a chainsaw expert or a small engine expert, definitely leave some tips and comments below. I would love that. I'm sure my followers would love that. If you haven't already, hit the plus, follow along, and see us in the next one. Bye!